recognize their strengths, regain a sense of control, and develop the tools they need to move forward in their lives. She utilizes family systems and cognitive behavioral approaches when conducting individuals, couples, and family therapy. She integrates Christian concepts when appropriate. To assist clients in finding more meaning and purpose in their lives, change is challenging. It takes courage and commitment to reach out for help. A supportive, compassionate, therapeutic relationship is the basis for change. We also have Alejandra, a presenter today, who has a Master of Public Health degree and is the Prevention, Education, and Outreach Coordinator at Strength United. Her approach to violence prevention is deeply rooted in the belief that knowledge is power. She has worked with professionals and community members to build their knowledge and provide practical skills that individuals can implement in their everyday lives to promote healthy family and professional relationships. She has helped mobilize communities and helped create countless campaigns promoting healthy relationships. During the pandemic, she adopted her first dog and is building a healthy relationship with Leo. So now, Priscilla and Alejandra, the stage is yours to share your expertise about awareness and how to recognize sexual harassment, assault behaviors, and cope with the emotional impact.
Thank you so much, Phyllis.
Thank you. I line up every time I hear my doggo's name. And so we're going to be presenting on a lot of topics. Priscilla and I met before this, and there's so much information to sexual assault and harassment that really, just to prepare you all, there are going to be a lot of slides, and we are going to be providing the presentation as a PDF, because we do think that's going to be a good resource for you to have to look back on and really expand on some of the things that we're going to, talk about. And so just a couple of group agreements. We both agree that we love participation and we love when people ask questions. And so these are a couple of assumptions that we kind of come into this space with, right? There is no wrong intention. If somebody's asking a question, we're happy to answer. One person talking at a time. Step up, step back. If you notice you talk a lot and maybe somebody else wants to ask a question, and we're virtual, so that can be a little difficult to just kind of like notice that within yourself and give people space to talk. And if you're very quiet and you're one of those people like me who has questions, but you don't know when or how, please ask anything that isn't making sense, or if you have any clarifying questions, please ask them. We have set up our presentation to answer questions throughout. We're open to answer questions throughout, and then at the end of the presentation, we also have time for folks to ask questions then. Coming into space with an open heart and open mind, have fun, and then practice self-care. We were talking earlier about how these topics are very heavy, and so feel free to step away, take a glass of water, go away, come back when you need it. Like I mentioned, we're going to be sending this presentation your way, so you will have it. Like I mentioned, we have a jam-packed schedule today, right? So these are all the topics that we are going to be covering today. Priscilla and I are going to go back and forth to give y'all a break from each other. And we're going to start off with trauma. So I'm going to hand it off to Priscilla. And yeah.
Thank you, Alejandra. So trauma, what is trauma? So trauma is an event that is outside one's normal experience that causes intense fear for life. Traumatic events can be man-made or naturally occurring. Those events that are man-made are those such as homicides, sexual assault, attack, war, and accidents. Those that are naturally occurring are fires, earthquakes, flood, hurricanes, etc. So what makes an event traumatic? It involves a threat real or perceived to one's physical or emotional well-being. It is overwhelming. It results in intense feelings of fear and lack of control. It leaves one feeling helpless. It changes the way a person understands the world, themselves, and others. What are the different types of trauma? So there is acute trauma, which results from one single incident. Chronic trauma is repeated and prolonged, such as domestic violence or abuse. There's complex trauma and its exposure to varied and multiple traumatic events, often of an invasive interpersonal nature. And what are the effects of trauma? Distortion of the world view, foreshortened future, nothing is positive, could happen to me, betrayal, sense of loss, confusion, resentment, loss of innocence. I think we skipped some slides, no? There we go. Effects of trauma could be physical. So you could be experiencing gastrointestinal problems, cardiopulmonary disease, heart disease, ulcers, diabetes, neurological, chronic exhaustion, insomnia, headaches, such as migraines, heartburn, hot or cold sweats, nausea, weight gain or loss, skin breakouts such as hives or eczema, sexual dysfunction, and frequent illnesses. Psychological effects of trauma include depression, anxiety, fear, guilt, reduced sense of personal accomplishment, conflict with coworkers, angry outbursts, difficulty concentrating, issues with safety, trust, and control. Again, we went over this, but I'll go over it again. Effects of trauma. Oh, okay. So trauma and the brain. The limbic system helps to perceive and evaluate the environment and respond to fear, emotion, and stress. When a traumatic event occurs, the amygdala senses a threat to the person's survival. Hormones are secreted and neurons fire to alert the body to fight, flight, or freeze. This survival response takes over and the person reacts with strategies that keep them alive. While the survival mode is activated, the prefrontal cortex, the thinking part of the limbic system that controls reasoning, judgment, impulse control, goes offline. And trauma and its resulting stress harms us through physiological changes to the body and brain. Those harms can persist throughout life, and excess stress can predispose us to everything from diabetes to heart disease, maybe even cancer.
Okay, I want to apologize to everyone. I think there's a delay on my keyboard from when I go to the next slide and when it actually happens. But does anybody have any questions before we move on to harassment?
I don't see any questions in the chat and I don't see anyone's hand raised.
Okay, sounds good. So moving on to harassment, right? We started with trauma because trauma is a very broad term. And then now we're going to be moving on to the two specific topics that we came to talk about. And so harassment exists within a continuum of interpersonal violence. The little circles that are white we're going to be covering throughout this presentation, but really these topics that we're talking about today exist within a continuum of violent behavior, both physical, verbal, emotional. And so harassment can be that, right? We have sexual harassment, which is unwelcome sexual advances, requests for sexual favors, or other verbal or physical conduct of a sexual nature in which submission or rejection creates an intimidating, hostile, or offensive environment. And I think that's really where we kind of want to focus, right? I believe the next slide is going to be a video, and just knowing the wide age range that we have here present, We did kind of go with like very basic videos so as to kind of like adhere to everyone's age. But really, when you're looking at sexual harassment or just harassment in general, I want you all to focus on those last words: intimidating, hostile, or offensive environment.
Stop harassing me. Sexual harassment is a type of bullying intended to hurt or intimidate someone. It can include making sexual jokes, comments, or gestures to or about someone, spreading sexual rumors in person, by text, or online, writing sexual messages about people on bathroom stalls or in other public places, showing someone inappropriate sexual pictures or videos, touching, grabbing, or pinching someone in a deliberately sexual way, asking someone to send you naked pictures of herself or himself, pulling at someone's clothing, and brushing up against someone in a purposefully sexual way. If you're being harassed, don't blame yourself. The idea that someone was asking for it because of something they did, said, or were wearing is false and unacceptable. It often can be helpful to start by telling the person doing the harassing to stop. Let him or her know that this behavior is not okay with you. If that doesn't stop the harassment, don't just ignore the behavior. Usually, ignoring it won't make it stop. Instead, tell a trusted adult about it. Telling someone sooner leads to faster results. You should keep a record of the events that have happened. That way you'll have them if your school or family has to take legal action. Remember, no one has the right to sexually harass or bully anyone else, no matter what.
Do we have any thoughts on the video? I usually wait like 5 to 10 seconds after I ask a question. All right. And so that video really encompassed a lot of like what it is, how to deal with it. And then I think one of the central points of this whole presentation that you're going to see coming up time and time again is just that it's not the victim's fault, right? It's a person who, if anyone has ever experienced anything similar to this, it isn't their fault. And so living in a pandemic world, we are living our lives a lot online, and there can be sexual abuse and harassment done. And so these are a couple of examples of harassment that could be done onto adults. So there is revenge porn, which essentially is somebody releasing private videos of their sexual acts without the consent of somebody else. We're going to talk about consent later on, but really consent is permission to do something. They could be receiving online harassment. So we saw that in the video, right? Like videos, messages, asking for those unsolicited photos, or sending unsolicited explicit video that somebody is not asking for. That is very unpleasant, right? I don't know about you guys, but sometimes my husband shows me like videos of people getting their toes pulled off and without any warning, or pimple popping. And that's very unpleasant for me on that very basic level. And so really like thinking about how unpleasant it is when somebody doesn't ask for your permission, and then proceeds to harass you in this way. With technology, we have the ability to do what are called deep fakes, which is when people superimpose someone's face into someone else's body. So you may never have done anything explicit, but with technology, folks can take images of one person and put it onto explicit content. And that's really hard to, it's very hard on you, on your life. And so I like this quote here, which is a survivor who had a deepfake done. And basically she says, when something is uploaded, it can never really get deleted. It will just be posted forever, right? Things live on the internet forever. And yeah, she was a victim of this. When we talk about abuse, this is a super comprehensive wheel. You'll get this on the slides, but anytime we talk about any abuse, the power and control wheel come into place. So when abuse is happening, whether sexual harassment, sexual abuse, one person has power and control over another person. And these are different ways that they can use power and control through the digital age. But again, stats. I'm a big fan of stats. I love stats, but one thing that I always tell people when I present is that stats are the tip of the iceberg, right? An iceberg, what we see is not what it is. There's so much more underneath the water. With stats is the same. Take these numbers and in your mind, you can add so many more percentage points to them just because these numbers are all based on what people report. And something that we know about abuse is that folks don't report because there's a lot of, it's a taboo subject and there's a lot of silence around it. So this is here for y'all to look at and know that it happens to everybody, adults, young people, men, women, trans folks. Like this takes the gambit, and everyone is a victim or does experience sexual assault, can experience sexual harassment. Effects. Similar to trauma, right? Like all of these things are traumatic. And so people, they can feel threatened. And imagine feeling threatened in a digital age, right? Like maybe when it's like a physical thing, you knew, okay, this person lives, you know, in this city, so I'm not gonna run into them. But then the digital age, you don't know when a message is gonna come in, an email, a text. And so that can really be heightened when we're talking about digital harassment. Humiliated, degraded. And so all of these things, they all can be an effect of both online and in-person harassment. And so it can impact young people and adults in their work, right? It is a young person's job to go to school. We go to our 9 to 5, but really having that, you know, all of these previous effects, imagine how that impacts school work and work life. It really can impact self-esteem and start, you know, giving folks depression, anxiety, panic attacks. And that really is something that we need to be aware of. And I think like with anything in life, every single person has a different subjective experience to things that happen to them. And so there is no cookie cutter way of saying like, oh, the bullet points in the previous slide, these are the only effects. Different people can experience different side effects. And you just have to be aware of that. So whenever I talk to people, like knowing someone very well is a good indicator of when things radically change. So making sure we're looking at folks' behavior and making sure that we're checking in on people. I'm gonna zoom past these because my time is coming to an end. So there are tactics that folks use to entice children. A lot of it is grooming, taking advantage of just like that critical age that people are in and playing to that. So it's a lot of just liking their posts, liking what they say if they talk bad about their parents or have struggles with their parents. A lot of the folks that extort children will latch onto that. And then for our LGBTQIA+ community, which oftentimes they get kicked out of their home or face rejection from family, a lot of the times perpetrators offer incentives like gift cards, alcohol, drugs, lodging, transportation, food, right? And so those are a couple of things. I will zoom past my slides. There's so many ways that folks can get in and know people by social media and know what their interests are and start to develop that relationship. There's so much more. I'll show you if you show me, enticing them, making it seem like it's worth their while. They can be pretending to be younger than they actually are. Yes. Any questions or comments before we move on to our next topic? Popcorn Priscilla.
Thank you, Alejandra. So now we're going to be talking about sexual assault. So what is sexual assault? Sexual assault is an umbrella term that includes physical and non-physical acts of sexual nature that take place without a person's consent, referred to as SA for short. Any uninvited, unwelcomed, unsolicited, or unwanted behavior that is directed towards an individual, regardless of gender. According to the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, sexual assault can be verbal, visual, or anything that forces a person to join in unwanted sexual contact or attention. Sexual assault is a crime of violence, not a crime of passion. So sexual assault crimes usually involve motives of dominance and or control rather than sexual gratification. Power and control. Rape is a form of sexual assault and is defined differently in every state, but generally any non-consensual or forced intercourse is considered rape. The FBI expands the definition of rape, which will state the penetration, no matter how slight, of the vagina or anus with any body part or object, and oral penetration by a sex organ of another person without the consent of the survivor. Stats. So 1 out of every 6 American women have been the victim or survivor of an attempted or completed rape in her lifetime. Again, as Alejandra mentioned earlier, stats are fluid because it's based upon reporting of the victim. So in 2005 to 2010, 78% of sexual violence involved an offender who was a family member, intimate partner, friend, or acquaintance. Since the majority of an acquaintance rape survivors are between the ages of 15 and 24, with an average age of 18, college students are particularly vulnerable. Females ages 16 to 19 are 4 times more likely than the general population to be victims of rape, attempted rape, or sexual assault. Females ages 16 to 24 are more vulnerable to intimate partner violence than any other age group, at a rate almost triple the national average, which may include sexual violence. About 3% of American men, and again, this may be higher because men most likely and more often do not report. So about 3% of American men, or 1 in 33, have experienced an attempted or completed rape in their lifetime. Every 2 minutes, someone in the US is sexually assaulted. More than 50% of all rape, sexual assault incidents were reported by victims to have occurred within 1 mile of their home or at their home. These are sobering stats. Here's more sobering stats. Out of every 100 rapes, 46 get reported to police, 12 lead to an arrest, 9 get prosecuted, 5 lead to a felony conviction, and 3 rapists will spend even a single day in prison. The other 97 will walk free. So what are the common effects of sexual assault? Feelings of depression, shame, hopelessness, or despair, even feelings of hatred towards oneself, feeling dirty, feeling ineffective, feeling as though one is permanently damaged, loss of former belief systems, constant feelings of being threatened, uncontrollable reactive thoughts, hypervigilance, substance abuse, alcoholism, sexual problems, inability to maintain healthy, close relationships or choose appropriate people to be friends with, hostility, constant arguments with loved ones, social withdrawal, self-destructive behaviors, impulsive behaviors, inability to make healthy occupational or lifestyle choices, dissociative symptoms, compulsive behavioral patterns, and suicidality. And there's many more. These are just some of them. An individual's subjective experience, common feelings, why me, powerlessness, fear, sadness, humiliation, guilt, self-blame, shame, betrayal, silencing. Factors that impact experience, intersecting identities, cultural values or beliefs, availability of social supports, developmental stage or age, prior experiences and frequency, exterior validation or shame, their own experiences, accessibility of natural supports and healers, their coping and life skills, immediate family involvement, responses of the larger community in which they live. Any questions in regards to sexual assault?
Yes. If the sexual assault happens on a school campus, what happens to the personal information? Is it kept confidential? And there's also kind of a connected one. If they're under 18, are the parents contacted?
Yes, if they're under 18, definitely the parents are contacted. That is not kept confidential. But if they're an adult, it is kept confidential and it's reported to campus security. I work at COC, so that something like that is reported to campus safety and of course to the police.
Yeah, Strength United is a CSUN agency and it's a similar process. And then I believe on the CSUN campus, I think it depends on campus to campus, but CSUN has campus care advocates specifically there for I think they're the only confidential resource on campus that doesn't have to report anything. So if someone is sexually assaulted and they reach out to the campus care advocates, they can receive services like therapy and group support systems through them without having to go through Title IX.
Of course,
oh, sorry, go
we
ahead.
don't, so it is reported to campus safety, but it's up to the individual to report it to the police, of course.
I
Okay,
have,
that was the
yeah.
follow-up question.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I do have a question. What is the percentage of COC, this situation occurring? Of rape?
That's a good question, Phyllis. I'm not sure about that.
Well, just a guess. I mean, obviously it happens, right?
Yes, it does happen. And it happened a lot prior to 2020.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, I live in
I
a
would say,
naive-
I would say probably 6% to 10%.
And again, chiming in with like CSUN stats, something that is very interesting is I think every year the police department releases a crime report. And so Strength United works with survivors of violence from CSUN, and every yearly report has 0 accounts of like rape occurring. And it's all through technicalities. Like our campus care advocates are usually have their appointments full. They're seeing clients that are CSUN students. And so because of, when we talk about stats, that's part of it, right? Like, because of like technicalities or somebody not reporting, I think year after year, the numbers are super, super low.
If I recall, prior to 2020, I think there was 1 or 2 incidents that were reported and did even come out in the Santa Clarita Valley Signal that occurred on campus. And I think it was determined as a sexual assault.
And so, oh, sorry, Phyllis, is there another
Oh,
question?
no, I'm just shaking my head.
Any other
I have a
questions in regards?
naive- I have a naive mind, so.
Any other questions about sexual assault?
Yes, there is one. What happens if I know that this happened to somebody else and they're afraid to come forward? What can I do?
That will be part of our presentation, but just really quickly, one of the best things you can do is not judge and be there to listen, be there to support them.
Okay, thank you.
And so on the flip side of all of this harassment and abuse and interpersonal violence, we also wanted to provide folks with like a benchmark to compare like what is, what are proper ways to communicate, which is what consent comes down to. And then specifically speaking on like sexual harassment, sexual assault, we now use affirmative consent. I think all colleges have a policy on this, whereas the main change on consent is before was no means no. And affirmative consent has shifted the lens to yes means yes, meaning you need affirmative, active participation in what's happening. So consent is informed, affirmative, conscious decision made by each participant to engage in mutually agreed upon sexual consent and sexual activity. Consent is important in every facet of your life. Like I mentioned before with my husband showing me pimple popping videos, I need consent for those too, right? Like that is still, it is important for us when we're asking for something to not assume that we can borrow something from our siblings, our parents. Consent should be practiced with everyone. So here's a video.
If you're still struggling with consent, just imagine instead of initiating sex, you're making them a cup of tea. You say, hey, would you like a cup of tea? And they go, oh my God, I would love a cup of tea. Thank you. Then you know they want a cup of tea. If you say, hey, would you like a cup of tea? And they're like, I'm not really sure. Then you could make them a cup of tea or not, but be aware they might not drink it. And if they don't drink it, then, and this is the important part, don't make them drink it. Just because you made it doesn't mean you are entitled to watch them drink it. And if they say no, thank you, then don't make them tea at all. Just don't make them tea. Don't make them drink tea. Don't get annoyed at them for not wanting tea. They just don't want tea, okay? They might say, yes, please, that's kind of you. And then when the tea arrives, they actually don't want the tea at all. Sure, that's kind of annoying as you've gone to all the effort of making the tea, but they remain under no obligation to drink the tea. They did want tea, now they don't. Some people change their mind in the time that it takes to boil the kettle, brew the tea, and add the milk. And it's okay for people to change their mind. And you are still not entitled to watch them drink it. And if they're unconscious, don't make them tea. Unconscious people don't want tea. And they can't answer the question, do you want tea? Because they're unconscious. Okay, maybe they were conscious when you asked them if they wanted tea. And they said yes. But in the time it took you to boil the kettle, brew the tea, and add the milk, they are now unconscious. You should just put the tea down. Make sure the unconscious person is safe. And this is the important part again. Don't make them drink the tea. They said yes then, sure, but unconscious people don't want tea. If someone said yes to tea, started drinking it, and then passed out before they'd finished it, don't keep on pouring it down their throat. Take the tea away. Make sure they're safe, because unconscious people don't want tea. Trust me on this. If someone said yes to tea around your house last Saturday, that doesn't mean they want you to make them tea all the time. They don't want you to come around to their place unexpectedly and make them tea and force them to drink it going, but you wanted tea last week. Or to wake up to find you pouring tea down their throat going, but you wanted tea last night. But if you can understand how completely ludicrous it is to force people to have tea when they don't want tea, and you're able to understand when people don't want tea, then how hard is it to understand it when it comes to sex? Whether it's tea or sex, consent is everything. And on that note, I'm going to go make myself a cup of tea. If you're
All right. That's just it's a cheeky way to talk about consent. And then to further drive it home, here are some comics that also kind of like show how silly not adhering to somebody's consent in different non-sexual scenarios are, right? And so I'm gonna just read the middle one. Thanks for letting me borrow your car. No problem. A week goes by. Friend comes over and is taking the car. You said I could borrow your car last week. I'm taking it right now. And the friend's just essentially saying, just because I let you borrow the car last week doesn't mean you could borrow it this week too. So ways to lose consent. I think it was mentioned in that video, right? When you unconscious, when the stick figure is pouring tea onto that unconscious stick figure on the ground, someone is not awake, they cannot consent. If there is force, threat, intimidation, or fear, they cannot consent. That is not consent. And if folks are under the age of 18, the legal age of consent is 18 in the state of California. And so really it's affirmative consent is given, is active. Somebody should be enthusiastic about it. Somebody, should freely give it, no threat, no intimidation. And so oftentimes something that we see when, especially the conversation around sexual assault is very gendered in like for women, because they tend to be the survivors, victims of sexual assault. So oftentimes when somebody is assaulted, the question is often asked like, oh, well, what were you wearing? Or like, why were you out drinking? Especially as we get to those college aged kids and older, if somebody didn't say no, if somebody is silent, that's not consent. And flirting is very subjective. I've been told I flirt a lot, and I do not intend to flirt with many people in the world. I'm an awkward person, but I have been told that, right? And so then that's not consent. When someone perceives flirting, that doesn't mean anything. And so I think oftentimes people are afraid of verbal communication, even if it's with our friends in a very like mutual way. Sometimes it feels awkward to ask someone to stop, right? Or to not do something. It might feel awkward to, like just remembering high school experiences and just, going along with the bigger group that, might be doing, I don't know. For me, it was Battle of the Bands. I didn't like Battle of the Bands, yet I went every semester because all my friends wanted to go, yet I didn't feel confident enough to like talk to them about wanting to do something else. So it can be as simple as that and as complex as when, we're talking about sexual encounters. And a big thing with consent is I think a lot of people are afraid of rejection. And then people don't know how to handle rejection very well. And so I think in our households, as we start talking about these things, I think it's also very important to instill in our youth that rejection is part of life. They are going to be rejected by people they're interested in, and how to deal with that, right? Like that rejection doesn't mean that you yourself are not worthy of whatever, right? It doesn't mean that you're not worthy of love or, friendship, connection, but it just means that that person and you are not meant to connect in whatever way. And that's okay. There are plenty of people out there that you are meant to connect with. And it's best practice to do it with everybody being informed and everybody being on the same page. So yeah, with us, like it should be a dialogue. It can change, right? So just because you said yes last week doesn't mean that it's a yes today. So it is an ongoing thing. It's not just a one-time yes, and you can assume yes every single time.
Or even in the moment, if you say yes in the moment and then at some point you change your mind and you say, no, I don't want to go through, that's the consent ends right there.
Yes, thank you. And so these are ways that consent can sound like. Someone can say, yes, I'm sure, I'm excited. I'm not worried, I want this. But again, silence, not consent, right? And then these are ways that someone can be expressing that they're not sure. It could be silence, it could be, I thought I wanted to, all of these different things. And then I think the next one is more like body language, right? And so even in little kids, we see them, I've seen precious little ones who like see their friends at preschool and they run to each other. You have these two kids with their open arms just running to each other and they hug each other, right? That is very affirmative consent. I've also seen a kid running to another kid and then the other kid kind of being like this and then that other kid hugging them, right? That is a very clear physical way of like telling or noticing that maybe someone's unsure about this physical touch. And so I like that example because I do think that these issues and these topics start at home, and they start way, way earlier than we think they do. And so, you know, it's how do we communicate to that kid that has so much love to show that, you know, maybe you got to look at how the other kid is receiving it, and maybe that's not the right way, and that it's okay for different people to be at different places with, you know, physical affection. So yes, the consent is here for you to express your desires and boundaries. And again, consent is used across all relationships in life, not just romantic, not just sexual. It is used with family. It is used with platonic relationships with your friends. It is used with strangers. So, you know, you wouldn't go up to a stranger and hug them. You wouldn't go up to a dog and pet it without knowing that it wants to be pet. And so these are all, consent is present everywhere.
So how can we help those who have experienced sexual harassment or sexual assault? Here are tips on how to help someone who is a survivor of sexual violence and harassment. So be patient, believe them, let them talk, educate yourself, refer to resources, get help for yourself. Don't try to rationalize, provide options and let them choose. Do not avoid the victim, survivor, or the subject. Establish yourself as a safe person and make them feel safe. This is about them, not about you. And so here's a great video by Brene Brown. Audio.
And sympathy. Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, I'm down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. I had it, yeah. And we do it all the time, because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now. I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
So what can you say to someone to support them when they tell you that they've been abused? You can start off by listening, starting with, I believe you. It's not your fault. I want you to be safe. You don't deserve this. You deserve to be treated with respect. I love you. This is important. What do you need? I'm glad you told me. I'm here if you ever need me or ever want to talk. Thank you for trusting me. So how do you handle a report of online sexual harassment for children? If a child experiences online sexual harassment, informing parents or caregivers is the next natural progression, unless there is reason to believe that doing so will put the young person at risk of further harm. Understandably, parents, caregivers may be upset or angry at the incident their child has experienced or possibly blame them for being involved. It's important to prioritize the safeguarding of the victim above all else and finding ways to work with parents, caregivers to create an effective and supportive plan for the victim going forward. Meet with parents, caregivers, ask the child if they want to be involved in this process. Do the parents, caregivers blame their child for the incident? If so, help them in understanding that the best way to help their child is not to focus on who is at fault, but to offer emotional support and a safe space to talk about their feelings. Is the victim reluctant to tell their parents, caregivers why? Does this have wider implications? Provide them mental health and legal services. Handling a report of online sexual harassment for all ages. Consider how the disclosure was made. Was it made by a friend of the, or was it overheard indirectly? Avoid victim blaming. The victim may have engaged in some risky behavior that another person has taken advantage of, but this does not mean they deserve blame. Acknowledge the barriers a person has overcome to make a disclosure. Take their report seriously and reassure them that they have done the right thing. Involve the person in decision-making. Give them as much information and detail on next steps as appropriate. Not understanding what is going to happen next can make the experience even more upsetting for those involved. Carefully consider the language used to support the victim and take a non-judgmental approach. This is very important. Explain who else may need to be informed about the disclosure, but also explain who will not need to be told. Confidentiality is helpful still. It needs to be clarified exactly what this means in realistic terms. Reporting of online sexual harassment for all ages. If you or someone you know experiences online sexual abuse and harassment, don't judge. Save all emails, messages, and other communications. Have both electronic and print copies. Save all records of threats against the victim's safety or life. Include written, recorded threats, date, time, and circumstances. Provide resources to mental health and legal services. As a bystander, how can you intervene? Strategy for prevention of various types of violence, including bullying, sexual harassment, sexual assault, and intimate partner violence. Look for the best exit strategies. Be direct and clear with all of your requests. Intervene early, engage other bystanders. Know that you can make a difference. How to help a victim survivor of sexual abuse, the initial steps. Listen and be respectful to the survivor. Sometimes just being there is more comforting than anything else. If the sexual assault is recent, encourage the survivor to go to a hospital as soon as possible. For evidence purposes, it's important that the survivor do their best not to shower, eat, drink, or use the bathroom until after any evidence has been collected. This is super important. Also respect their wishes if they choose not to report the crime, because that could also be what they ultimately want to do, is not to report it, and you have to be okay with that. How to help a victim survivor of sexual abuse, the initial steps. First and foremost, you can do is listen without blaming or judging. If you don't know what to say, remind them that you believe them and that you are here for them. Once a survivor starts sharing, they may just tell a little or they may tell a lot. It depends on many factors. Your role is to listen non-judgmentally. What to do if someone you care about has been sexually assaulted. Encourage them to make their own decision whether to report or not. Don't make the decision for them. If the survivor chooses not to report or go with the process, that's okay. It's important that the survivor receive medical attention, and should the survivor go to counseling or not. Hopefully they will choose to go to counseling. What do I say to someone who I think has been sexually assaulted or who reports to me? You should never assume that someone has been sexually assaulted. If an individual does disclose, acknowledge what they have told you, that it must be difficult for them to discuss. Your response should always come from a trauma-informed care perspective, meaning you should meet them where they are without judgment. Don't bring in your ideas on how they should be acting or judge on things that they are saying. Remember that survivors may have co-occurring problems on top of what they have just experienced. For example, stress, mental illness, anxiety, family marriage issues, financial struggles, etc. What kind of internal responses may a person have who is hearing this information from someone? Initially, you may feel surprised that you have just been trusted with this information. It's important to control your emotions and facial expressions. It's best to be present in the moment, no matter how nervous or anxious you may feel. Remember to keep the focus on them. What to do if you have been sexually assaulted? Number one, it was not your fault. No matter what you did or didn't do, you didn't ask or deserve to be raped or sexually assaulted. It's a good idea to talk to a professional counselor to begin the healing process. It's important to make sure that you are okay. This means medical attention is needed right away. Note that all medical providers are mandated reporters and will call law enforcement if they have knowledge of or suspect sexual assault. As a therapist, I am not mandated to report unless it's a minor, but as an adult, I'm not mandated to report. But medical providers are, such as nurses and doctors, are required by law to report. Center for Assault Treatment Services, or CATS. Sexual assault nurse examiners conduct a complete and sensitive medical forensic examination that provides critical documentation of the assault and can include evidence collection. Nurse examiners also provide testimony for courts. So what's the law enforcement's role? The police may decide that a medical exam is needed to collect evidence. If so, they will call an off-campus sexual assault emergency response team, or SART, and drive you to a specifically equipped hospital. Police officers provide a professional and thorough investigation to develop a factual history of the assault. If law enforcement requests the exam, California law states that you can't be billed for it because of VAWA, Violence Against Women Act. Prosecutors, the district attorney's office has established the Victim Impact Program, or VIP, to handle cases of child abuse, sex crimes, and family violence. In those cases where prosecution will be pursued, a specifically trained deputy district attorney handles each case from beginning to end. Trauma centers have offices in the buildings to connect the survivors. Resources.
Do you have any questions about how to help or clarification?
Yes. You talked a lot about the prosecutors, the law enforcement, medical professionals, the rules that everyone is supposed to follow. What do you think are the biggest holes in this whole process that you see?
In my experience, because I have helped sexual assault survivors and sexual those who have suffered rape as well. And for me, it takes a lot of patience, a lot of time for the victim to come to the realization of what they've gone through. They're in shock and they're ambivalent about whether they want to report or not. And initially they may say no, and then after time they may say yes. So it's a matter of, just being patient with the victim. And if they choose not to report, you have to be okay with that too. And they are allowed to ask for a female deputy if they feel more comfortable talking to a female deputy versus a male deputy. But in my experience, the collaboration with the sheriff's department, it went smoothly in the experiences that I've had. Alejandra.
I was just gonna acknowledge that I copy paste that. I was gonna say that hesitancy, I would say, is the biggest hurdle in getting folks to start this whole process.
There's a comment that says, unfortunately, law enforcement is the biggest issue. And I was going to also ask, to your knowledge, our local hospitals, and I think it was maybe on your previous slide where you talked about the special, the hospitals with the
Yes.
special designation are our local
Yes.
hospitals.
Mm-hmm.
My knowledge is that the closest CAT center is Dignity Health in Northridge. And then they Strength United is part of a family justice center, which is like a building where there are forensic nurses, there are special detectives that focus on interpersonal violence. And then Strength United is the mental health component of it. And so that's the closest family justice center to the Santa Clarita area. And so I know oftentimes folks, the sheriff department knows about it. And so folks will be taken to the Family Justice Center just because we have 24-hour, and by we, I mean, I'm speaking for 1/3 of it, but the nurses are available 24 hours a day, and police know that they can take survivors there.
I'm curious to know the person that stated that police are the biggest problem, if they could extrapolate, I mean, if they could elaborate on their statement.
It's in the chat. I'm not sure if it is sent to everyone. So if you'd like to elaborate, please feel free to do so. As a reminder to everyone, you can always submit your questions in the chat. And if you would like to remain anonymous, you can submit them directly to the submit questions here window, and I will read them without indicating your name.
I will say, I don't know if this is what that person was referring to, but the officers that work in the center, the Family Justice Center, those officers that are housed in the Family Justice Center receive extensive training to be trauma informed. But within that, I think not only in the police force, but I would venture to say that there are a lot of education, mental health, not everyone is trauma informed. And so unfortunately, some of our advocates have seen heard or officers who are bringing survivors into our center that are, just part of regular LAPD. They're not part of this isn't their population. It's not uncommon for them to speak to the survivor in victim blaming terms and not be trauma informed. It's not something that happens. I wouldn't say it's 9 out of 10 outside officers, but it's something that happens. I would say every couple of weeks, we in our advocacy meetings, we hear of a case where folks aren't using the proper language or aren't using the proper energy and putting that into the survivor. And I would also say that that happened, I would venture to say as a member of the community, like just, you know, the world, I think oftentimes a lot of people, regardless of what their profession is, like, I think we have a hard time talking about sexual assault and talking about survivors, myself included. You know, I'm very gung-ho about this work. And I would like to think that I'm very liberal and progressive. And I find myself, I catch myself, just like the internal biases that I have, I catch myself passing judgment sometimes. And so I share that with you all to say that, like, I think we all could be, you know, there's like, we all have internal work and we all have something to do, internal work to do. And unfortunately, we see that across all professions that work with our survivors, including some of our advocates. We have to, you know, like, we have advocate supervision for that reason, so we can talk through the cases and talk through like what was done well and what could have done better. And so I think that's part of, it's just part of, I think that's just part of like forward motion, right? Like, I think we are moving in a forward direction when it comes to interpersonal violence. So those are my, you know, 50 cents on that, because it was more than 2 cents.
There are some more clarification comments in the chat. I don't know if you can see them or if you'd like me to read them.
I can go ahead and read it. Says, unfortunately, law enforcement is the biggest issue. Working with them, you are a victim. They need more training to deal with these types of victims. Speaking from experience, a lot of Santa Clarita sheriffs treat victims wrongly. It makes sense why things go unreported. And I would say, like, I don't know, like, there's a lot of stats on like communities that don't trust law enforcement, and unfortunately, you know, for sometimes historical reasons, just law enforcement is not seen as a trustworthy route. And so I do think it's important for folks to know alternative routes, right? Like, law enforcement isn't the only way to go if this has happened to you. And definitely like mental health services. I know Priscilla, earlier you said, like, we hope people, you know, reach out for counseling. And there are a lot of great organizations in our communities that offer free counseling. For specifically that reason. There is no one size fits all to everybody's recovery journey.
Great.
Thank you for that. I was going to just follow that up with a question. Do you or your agencies, your organizations have connections with law enforcement to work with them to help gain a better understanding, and how does that work?
With Strength United, we try to do, we do roll calls. And so that has been on pause, but like the different police forces within the SPOT 2, which is Santa Clarita, San Fernando Valleys, they have like small meetings where they review like new rules or whatever, and Strength United goes to those, and we try to like, we'll host like small trainings. And yeah, and so there are folks that we have really great relationships with within these two communities that are super open to having us there. But it's where it's the long game, right? This isn't something that is fixed with a training. It's really, it's something that requires commitment from both agencies or from both entities to like move forward.
And it's ongoing. It should be ongoing training, because it's easy to forget.
Yeah. Okay, we're gonna go on to resources. Strength United, I am here as a representative of Strength United. We offer free counseling, advocacy. So that means if someone does decide to file a report with the police, they can have an advocate there with them to advocate for them. In the most extreme cases, that has been the advocate, the survivor kind of giving the advocate free rein, and advocates really stepping up and, saying to the people that are interviewing the survivor, no, that's not okay. That word isn't okay, where you cannot, you cannot talk to this person like this. And then we refer out, like we are very cognizant of the fact that like mental health is one component of survivorship. And so we do try to build relationships with a lot of agencies in the community that can help support a survivor in their journey. We have individual group counseling. And then I myself, I work in the prevention and outreach department, which is basically like educating folks. Every time I do a presentation like this, I hear things like what Phyllis says. It's like, it seems like it's coming up more and more into like the everyday vernacular. And it's just people being like, wow, we didn't know about this. And so like, that's my passion, is going out into the community and helping educate folks, and also calling myself out on how I could be better, because I think that's important. If folks have any students that go to COC, they have a wonderful health and wellness center. And they also have, all colleges have resources specifically for survivors of assault. And so when I send the PDF, everything should be hyperlinked. And so you would be able to click on the website and it'll take you to that page.
Right. And for those students who, for those of you that are students at College of the Canyons, I want you to know that the Student Health and Wellness Center is here to help. We do provide 6 to 8 sessions per semester, and it's completely confidential with the exception of a couple of things. And we are offering sessions now in person and through Zoom and through telephone, depending on what you're most comfortable with. And these go back to every semester, it goes back to 0. So every semester you could choose to stay with us, or we can refer you to outside community providers such as Samuel Dixon, Child and Family Center, Children's Bureau, Santa Clarita Valley Mental Health. But we are here to help you if you are a COC student, and you only need to be enrolled in a 1-unit course or a non-credit course, and we can still provide services to you. I am one of those therapists at the center.
Y'all, while you're in college, take advantage of all these resources. Like,
Right, you pay for it through your health fees.
Phyllis.
Yes, I just want to say that we do have some college students with us today. So not necessarily from the area, not at the moment from our area. So I'm sure that their university or college would have the similar type of
Service, yes.
service to help.
Every college and university campus has a health center that provides personal counseling and medical services as well. Yes, we do help non-credit students as well. And if you'd like to set up an appointment, you can just call us at 661-362-3259, or you can email us at studenthealthcenter.canyons.edu. And I'll write that on the chat so that you can email us. So that's studenthealthcenter.canyons.edu.
Swimming through the last couple, again, there's going to be sent to you. There are apps. These are examples of 2 apps. There's so many apps out there that can help out. And literally with a click of a button, you can alert 6 people, 6 of your closest, like people in your circle of your location or different things. So definitely if you're worried about your safety and you want to use apps, you can find apps. These are 2. There are so many more. And then there are resources. There's national hotlines for everything. 1 in 6 is for men who are survivors of abuse. Tons of things for like children, exploited children, human trafficking, LGBTQIA youth. So like I mentioned, y'all will get these, you can have them. And then, push come to shove, you can reach out to Strength United and we can be that point person that can connect you to resources. Any questions?
I don't see any questions in the chat. If someone has a question, you could unmute yourself and ask it, or raise your hand, or you could put it in the chat.
Hi, my name is Maria, and I know we're short on time. And thank you for giving us this presentation. It's very informative. I have a question. I have a 5-year-old daughter, and I do not let her hug people that she doesn't want to hug. And I know it's a cultural thing, but at what age can I tell her that not all people have good intentions? And she doesn't need to do those things. Hug somebody if she's not comfortable with, and hugging that person.
My instinct is just, I think there are ways to talk about consent at starting at younger ages. So there's talk about safe touch, unsafe touch, and that's completely I would say maybe age appropriate. And then there are different conversations that kind of in middle school age, you start talking about personal safety and and then as you get older, you can start talking about STDs and things like that. But and the everything that comes with that. But I do think when you're young, it's very simple and just there's the video that I played, the sexual harassment one. It's from an agency called amaze.org, and they have that one's for middle school age students, but they have resources for young people younger than that and then older than that as well. And so I always recommend that to parents because I really like the videos and they're very clean, clear and clean cut.
Okay, thank you very much for the information. My daughter's 5, so I want her to not feel pressure to be hugging people if she doesn't want to, and it was harder first. I didn't know, and I actually learned that through Title IX training in college. And I thought I already knew about sexual harassment, and I thought I knew everything that there is to know, and that was a big error. And now I just, I want more information. I want to make sure that, she can be safe and that she doesn't have to go through things that I went through as a child.
And Maria, I agree with you. Culturally, as in our Hispanic culture, we are taught at a very young age, right? It's appropriate to give hugs and kisses to our family members and people that come into our homes. But I actually appreciate your approach, and it's an approach that I've used with my children, where they can hug and kiss someone if they only want to, not if we ask them to. If they don't feel like it, we should respect that they don't want to, and we shouldn't push them to.
Yes, and I do not apologize for that. I don't, but I want her to understand the reasons behind why I do that. Maybe other people do it, but I don't.
Perfect.
I do want to applaud you for being that change in your family, right? It's hard when you're breaking out of cultural norm. And so thinking about your future, future generations in your bloodline, there's going to be healthier boundaries, I would venture to say.
Yes.
Correct.
Yes, break the cycle.
Right, exactly.
Alejandra, could you maybe put the name of the organization where you got the video from in the chat? And then that way everyone can have access to it, if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
And there is a question in the chat asking about if there are any open online DVSA survivors support groups. There was a comment that Child and Family Center offers support groups over Zoom. Could you add any additional resources that would provide the DVSA survivor support groups?
Strength United does offer some, and I believe there's also, I know virtually they might be accepting folks from outside the San Fernando Valley, but it's the San Fernando Valley Community Mental Health Center. I can like type that in or find their website and type it in. They also work with survivors of DV and SA. Those are the two that come to mind.
And I don't see any other questions so far.
So if,
One
yeah.
just popped in actually.
Okay,
Sorry. What do you think is the most beneficial way to get someone to leave someone alone or someone who's potentially a victim?
I think that's a tough, I don't have an answer for that.
Yeah, I don't either.
Yeah.
I guess having an open conversation, non-judgmentally, weighing the pros and cons, possibly.
And if this person is specifically talking to like how to talk to someone who's like perpetrating violence onto someone, I think it's very difficult, right? Like, I think the younger person is, so like if we're talking about bullying, it's important to talk about it and like work through it. But I feel like this is just a feeling. But I feel like the older you get, it's harder to talk to someone who's perpetuating violence. And so there are programs, like there are perpetrator programs out in the community that work specifically with folks that that perpetrated domestic violence or sexual assault to their partners, but those are few and far between because the focus is obviously on the survivor, the person who the harm was done to. Priscilla, you're muted. Oh.
There are battering programs that are mandated by the court. It's 52 weeks, but I'm not sure if that's what the person is asking about.
There's a thank you in the chat, so I think you answered the question.
so unless there are any more questions, anybody have any additional questions at this point? So I would like to take this opportunity to thank Priscilla and Alejandra for sharing this valuable information with us that helps us understand and better cope with the sexual harassment and assault issues that may arise. What a great and informative workshop this has been. So I'd like to clap for that. And then I'd like to say, mark your calendars, because in 2 weeks, we're going to have another Life Forward workshop for this Santa year. It's scheduled on September the 25th, Saturday, September the 25th, from 10 to 11:15. Challenging emotions, building resilience in these traumatic times. It will be presented by Michelle Witkin. She has her PhD in psychology with a specialty in obsessive compulsive disorder and anxiety disorders. So you won't want to miss this important workshop.
No, you don't.
She's actually
great.
backed by demand, you know, because she's presented before, so we want her back. So she will guide us through dealing with COVID-19 that just doesn't seem to want to go away. So having said that, and you will be receiving, those who attend and everybody who's attended a past workshop will be receiving the flyer very shortly, within a couple of days. As I say, I want to thank everybody for joining us today. Be sure to check our website later this week, where you can see this workshop and other workshops that have been recorded available for your viewing. So again, thanks to everybody and have a great day.
Thank you, everyone, for attending.
Thank you so much. It was fantastic.